Supply chains are the lifeblood of the global economy. These intricate networks connect regions, facilitate trade, and create value structures that support industry and humanity on a massive scale. We're now facing increased complexity due to many different reasons, and we're blessed here to have this incredibly interesting panel representing so many diverse industries and geographies. And I hope to take this opportunity to the fullest today to explore how global trade will be impacted by potential increased tensions in the global economy. Today's discussion will explore plausible scenarios for global supply chains over the next 5 years under the anticipated US administration, examining the macroeconomic and geopolitical forces shaping these routes. To frame the discussion, my plan is that this conversation will unfold in 3 key segments: geopolitical tensions and trade dynamics, to take a closer look at how shifting global alliances and regional stability are shaping supply chains. And overlapping will be global leadership and the economic influence as a result. And third and last, looking at scenarios and mitigation strategies and the practical insights on how businesses can prepare for an uncertain future. To introduce my panel, very briefly, I'll let you introduce yourselves. We have Roger King, founder and chairman of ODS Holdings in Hong Kong, and he will shed light on the US-China tensions reshaping global trade flows and supply chain. He is a natural-born US citizen and lives in Hong Kong since a long time, so he has a unique perspective on culturally what we are up against. We have Claude, the star of Horasis, who is the former chairman of the Swiss Post. He has intricate knowledge of global supply chains and technologies, and is today the chairman of SymbioSwiss. Veronica Shim, family office wealth management, a leader in impact investing, global business strategies. She will give her perspective on Southeast Asia and how the region will impact global supply chains. Murat, Seitnepesov, president of the Greater Caspian Association in Switzerland, will provide insights into the Caspian region's role as a strategic trade corridor and the implications of China's Belt and Road Initiative for the Europe-Asia supply chain. And last but not least, we have Manoj from India, co-founder of Vera Healthcare, who will talk about how the healthcare supply chain plays a critical role and how technology can mitigate risks. So let me begin by asking the first question to you, Roger. How do you see China and US relations and potential increased tensions impacting global trade flows and the supply chain ecosystem?
Thank you, Oscar, and thank everyone for coming to listen to our session itself. As Oscar mentioned, actually, I was born in the United States, spent most of my early years in the United States. I still have a U.S. passport. A lot of my friends have given up their U.S. passports for various reasons. And, I was also a U.S. naval officer. So I've been very, very much involved in the United States itself and so forth. But I now live in Hong Kong, and I'm ethnic Chinese. So, when you talk about conflicts between China and the United States, it's sometimes, kind of interesting. In a sense, I have the cultural background of the United States as well as China itself, okay? In fact, I was telling some of our attendees when I was growing up, when my children were growing up, we used to speak English at home. And my son said to me, he said, "Dad, are we Chinese or not?" Okay, so, this is one of the things. So after they graduated from university, I actually sent them to a university in China to study, just to let them know they're also Chinese as well. So this is something we talk about. And now we're looking at a situation, of course, it's unpredictable. We have a new president coming in, an old president coming in again, and it's unpredictable. What he's going to do. But, it's kind of interesting. A lot of my friends in Asia, they actually prefer him than Kamala. The reason is that Donald is negotiable. whereas Kamala may not be negotiable. She sets a whatever the decisions are made, it gets fixed. Whereas Donald, he's interested in himself, right? So in that sense, you can negotiate with him, all right? So this is also very, very interesting. Now, of course, he now is telling everyone he's going to increase the tariff, especially for Chinese goods and so forth and so on. So guess what? A lot of my Chinese friends that are in manufacturing, they move their manufacturing to different countries, Vietnam and so forth, and Malaysia. So it's no longer a Chinese product itself, but they're the owners of the plant. In fact, actually, timing-wise, it's very good because in today's environment in China, we're shortage of laborers, actually. Everybody else is trying to, move up the ladder itself. So this is one way the Chinese are going to circumvent all these things. The other thing is that it also gives the Chinese an opportunity to open up new channels of relationship, particularly Europe, EU, and of course, Middle Eastern countries here, as well as spending a lot of time and effort in Africa as well. And of course, President Xi Jinping, several years back, he created this thing, Belt and Road Initiative. So this is a new channel. He's spending quite a bit of time and resources, financial resources as well, to develop relationship. So this just accelerates the relationship with all these countries. So the dependency on the United States is reduced significantly, okay? This is one of the things. The other interesting thing is that, we have a lot of second-generation Chinese that are going overseas to study. And, one time, I think the Chinese population, student-wise population, is one of the highest in the United States. Guess what? Now it's coming down, okay? And the families that can afford to send their kids, they're not there on scholarship. And the parents usually buy an apartment, this and that and so forth. So this kind of relationship is actually reducing the number of young people going to the United States. They're going to other places, but it doesn't mean, so I think it's not necessarily good for the United States, okay? This is some of the basic problems and challenges, and I think United States should really think about what it should do. Raising tariff it's not necessarily going to help the United States necessarily. It's going to just shift the manufacturing centers, and Chinese are just going to move to other places and everything else. So I think the impact on China's economy is not going to be as significant as most people think, and they'll develop new friendship. One other thing is also very interesting. The United States now is so scared, I would say scared of Chinese coming up in technology-wise. So they're trying to, certain products are not to be shipped into China itself. In fact, I was just telling some people, my first job after university, actually, I was working for a company called Bell Telephone Laboratories. I don't know if anybody's heard of that.
Of course.
It's in New Jersey. And I was in the military research lab. Do you think I can get a job today as a military research lab as an ethnic Chinese? No way, right? So what's happening is that China is now becoming much more self-dependent on technology. There used to be they send people overseas and so forth, and the dialogue between China, United States, and this and that. I think that unfortunately is going to be cut off. But on the other hand, I think China is going to spend a lot of time and effort to develop its own skills. And again, I think this kind of impact for the United States is not necessarily good itself. So, we live in a world that's multicultural, and we should not be judgmental on other people's culture. I live in two cultures itself, but the thing is that, Why not allow people to develop their own culture and enjoy themselves and so forth? Why do we have to impose our culture onto others? This is one of the things, I don't think Chinese are trying to impose Chinese culture overseas itself. And I think, anyway, I'll stop here for the time being, yes.
Some very interesting points you made there. I think that the Chinese and American economies are very interdependent. America is an import economy, China is an export economy. With that being considered, China has a lot to gain by becoming more independent, and the US has a lot to lose by being so dependent on many of the components that they rely on in general. And we're going to touch on that later with pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. But I want to turn to you now, Claude. When it seems like the consensus narrative is that Trump coming back to the White House poses unpredictability. I don't know where that is coming from, really. He was president quite recently, and he was very pragmatic. And he wants to see business. Of course, the US cannot survive without China as being such a key partner with all US blue chips. But what is the worst case scenario, and how can we prepare for such a worst case scenario? To set the stage, I would say that a war with Taiwan would be quite problematic in terms of supply chains and the semiconductors. I mean, seeing that it's so incredibly critical for every industry. We saw during COVID with the shortages of in the car industry, entire factories had to stop producing. What's your view on this?
Thank you very much. Well, the question is very easy. What is the worst case scenario? Third World War, total collapse of multilateralism, everybody becomes completely selfish, and an economic decrease, plus a lot of collateral damages. Well, I hope we will not go that far. At the risk of repeating things which I said at the plenary session of the GFS yesterday, but for the others, my view is the following. Trump is less unpredictable, as we say, because he says so much what he thinks that a lot of things are actually common sense. For him, any country which has a favorable trade balance in favor of the US, we can deal with. Any country which has a trade balance negative to the US, something has to change. It's very predictable. Alliances of values, like, for example, democracy, alliances with Europe, because we would have the same vision, comes second. Trade, number one. So, yes, he will repatriate the job in the US. Yes, he will close the borders. Yes, he will make sure that the investment, especially in technology, is done in the US. All of that, in my view, is highly predictable. There is something which is less discussed, which is the fact that the US military budget is the sum of the 10 next defense budget in the world. And this is not a democratic process. It's something like it lives by itself. But at the same time, there are wars. The US are selling the weapons, okay, to the friends of America, but it's still the business. And nobody can go against them because they are so strong. The deficit would go skyrocketing. And basically, the allies of the United States, they have the choice to agree or to agree. And the real question is, short term, clearly, it will help the US economy, but mid and long term, is it really a valid strategy? Personally, I'm not convinced. Personally, I think that that approach will naturally push some others in building other type of alliances. And we spoke about the Belt and Road. We can see a lot of other things. And somehow, the closest allies to the United States are sometimes becoming proxies for the US in the wars they have with their enemies. So I expect that there will be a fragmentation, not in two, but in several groups. And there will be more and more non-aligned countries who try to live with those various blocs. So it has, of course, an impact on the world trade. It means that part of the supply chain, which was in China, well, everybody knows now we want to have shorter lanes, or we want to have India or other non-Chinese to supply in order to diversify the risk. Obviously, it has an impact on logistics and on the new trade lanes. But it's more than that. For me, something which will be important is the possible fragmentation of the digital world. Because you are not, I remember when I was speaking with Fred Smith, the boss of FedEx, he was saying, I am carrying data and the parcel will follow. Now for that you need to have a seamless database. Now how do you do it if suddenly the internet becomes a Western internet, I don't know, a TikTok, something else in China, everybody uses different system. It's becoming much more complicated. And it's why in the logistics, I think we will suffer. And I will be short here, the word logistics is very vague. I will simplify it, and of course by simplifying I make a mistake, but you have bulk, you have containers, and you have pallet and parcels. The market is moving towards pallet and parcels. The e-commerce post-COVID is more and more home delivery. For that, you need an extremely sophisticated IT infrastructure because everybody's competing. FedEx would never accept that a parcel of them is delivered by a UPS van. And I can take all the other brands. So you have point to point the necessity to have the same electronic system. But if tomorrow in China they refuse part of the US systems, if they consider, FedEx was just coming from the American army. So if some of those American companies becomes persona non grata in part of the world, then you will need to have alliances between 2 or 3 partners, and that idea of fully integrating is challenged by the fact that partially physically and definitely numerically, there might be complications coming from local regulators. And I finish with the last thing. I remember once in Beijing, I have seen a company which had developed a software which would be the equivalent of Google Maps. They had put dozens of thousands of engineers. And I said, why you do that? Because of the Google Map could do it. And they said, no. Because if the Google Map comes to China, then tomorrow the Americans, they can send drones on China. So we will not allow American technology on our territory. So this is the reality of that fragmentation. And when you want to accompany it's easier if you are in traditional freight forwarding, but the more and more you come with advanced, really integrated solution, if the world disintegrates in different blocks, integrators will be at pain. So then there will be the need of an alliance with interfaces between different actors. I stop here.
It's very interesting points you raise here. You're talking about integration of platforms and thereby enhancing efficiencies globally. But when you integrate on a global scale, the risks are also exponentially greater.
Yes.
Like we've looked at CrowdStrike. Is that the cybersecurity threat that was quite recent, and the incredible consequences of such a small little bug? And I want to dovetail that when we talk about potential tensions with the US and China and Taiwan. Personally, I don't think that a war in the future between any superpower will be a kinetic war where they bring in aircraft carriers, because you can't defend them anymore. You have supersonic missiles that can take them out in an instance, weapons we don't even know about. The wars we've seen in the last couple of decades are very asymmetrical in the sense that, take Iraq or Afghanistan, even though they've been drawn out over decades, the casualties are quite limited, and the actual fire on the ground is not like traditional wars the way you see it. You're not going to have major armies fighting each other between China and the US, I hope. What you will have, I believe, is cyber warfare. Mm-hmm. And if that would happen, it would have the risk of completely debilitating supply chains to the extent that you don't even know where is what and what to do. So I wanted to take the discussion forward in such a scenario. What can be done? And in such a scenario, being fragmented would be advantageous if you're not dependent on Microsoft Windows that has been hacked and no longer accessible. And where I want to take this is for you. I'll let you answer first. But Murat, what role the Caspian region can play in terms of mitigating and being an alternative? But first, Claude, you wanted to say something.
No, very short. On what you said on the wars, you take two current examples. On one side, Lebanon, everything is airstrike, extremely effective, hitting headquarters, killing the people they want to kill. On the other side, take Gaza, endless infantry war, extremely difficult to win.
Yes.
And if you take the Ukraine, if Ukraine gets the super weapons of the West, possible to win. If it is infantry, traditional, then it becomes a question of mathematics, how many people you have on one side versus how many people you have on the other side. And it's a completely different equation. So, yes, they will try, especially the people who have dominance in terms of technology, especially the US, to make a technological war. But you don't occupy the ground by technology. You have, at some point, to come with people, and then the balance of power might be completely different. Remember the Korea War. Roughly, you had the Russians, North Koreans, Russians, who came down, nearly pushed the others out of Korea. Then the Americans came, went to the north. Then 2 million Chinese came and pushed again the border. At the end, the infantry is needed. if you want to occupy the land.
I just wanted to make the point that we haven't seen a war between two technological superpowers in a very, very long time, and I hope we won't. But if it would come to that, I think what I want to focus on is how would we respond in a globalized economy that is so interdependent to keep the economy going, and what would be the Caspian region's role in that?
Thank you, Oscar. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear members of Horasis community, and first of all, before my speech, I would like to express our gratitude to Dr. Frank Richter and Dr. Claude Béglé, who made it possible, who brought us together here to the exciting megapolis of Dubai, and we can talk, we can discuss, we can continue our friendship. We got the new members of the community, and we are very happy to be here. Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you very much, Claude, for this. Now back to the topic of the discussion. I will talk about the Greater Caspian region. It's not only 5 littoral states of the Caspian Sea. We are talking about these 5 states, 5 countries, but also Central Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, South Caucasus, and Black Sea countries. On the west, we have Ukraine, Romania, Moldova, Turkey. On the east, we have up to Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Pakistan. This is a huge region, 10 million square kilometer plus. 640 million people, $8 trillion GDP in the purchasing parity. And this region is extremely important for the world because this is one of the few points of growth in this world. And because of the recent geopolitical events, first of all, it's a Russian-Ukrainian war, second, the conflict in the Middle East, our region is right in the middle between these two conflicts. This is bringing a lot of complications, like, for example, in the region we have problems with the financing of trade activities, with the investment attraction, because people, they see on the map, they see on the north there is a problem, on the south there is a problem. Okay, maybe we should be careful not to do something in the middle. But on the other side, it's bringing a lot of opportunities, because suddenly ancient Silk Road, which was started 2,500 years ago or more, became again super important for this world. It's the only safe and sustainable route between the China and India particularly and Europe. And we see that a lot of cargo started to move. The huge infrastructure projects are going on. I will talk about this a little bit later, about Belt and Road Initiative. I think also could be interesting. But again, we see that ancient Silk Road became the great Silk Road of today as the opportunity for sustainable transit and for sustainable transportation of the cargoes. Also, this region is extremely important because huge hydrocarbon reserves are there, and we see the conflict in the Middle East again. And Caspian Sea Basin and Kazakhstan is one of the main oil and gas reserves on the world are there. And let's say only country, my country where I'm originally from, is Turkmenistan, has 4th biggest in the world natural gas reserves, which is estimated by different estimation up to 30 trillion cubic meters, not feet, meters. That's why, and in today's world, these are given additional dimension and additional diversification for the transit routes. Thank you.
So, I heard you mention India, which is playing an increasingly important role in the global supply chain, producing a lot of the pharmaceuticals. In fact, the world could not survive without the production of antibiotics from India, which makes you quite powerful. You have a pharmaceutical background, and you're very well aware on the logistics of supplying pharmaceuticals and highly technological platforms that you employ to do this. What's your perspective on the risk of increased tensions?
Thank you, Oscar. Am I audible?
You are.
Yeah, I'd like to again thank Frank and Claude for the opportunity. So, my Chinese friend is here, Mr. King. So we were having lunch together. But I'll tell you, India has one big advantage. And I'll tell you, I'm sorry to state that. With Trump coming in, he seems to be a friend of Modi and India. And with China, so India is already seen as China +1. From all the people I know, I have manufacturers all over the world I know, they look at India as a safe bet. We are gaining, and it's not about India or China. I'll come to the specific points. But India is also the pharmaceutical capital of the world. We produce 20% of APIs globally. About 40% of generic pharma to US goes from India. And 35% of all medicines in UK are sent from India. But, so the problem could be if there's a China, South Sea, all that issue which comes up from the supply chain point of view. Unfortunately or fortunately, we don't have a choice. 70% of our API ingredients come from China. So it's like a vicious or virtual cycle, I don't know. But because of that, if there is any disruption in that area, it obviously has a cataclysmic effect. It will, have that bounce effect. And if that happens, then obviously the supply chain gets disrupted, the medication doesn't go, and the health suffers. So we're talking about a very sensitive point of view, and I'm trying to be non-selfish over here to understand from a global standpoint on how healthcare can be damaged because of the supply chain conflict. Another area, if you look at vaccine production, during COVID time, and I'm not trying to propagate India here, is that the vaccine supply chain or the vaccine manufacturer, India was one of them, and thanks to COVID, globally the world got together and got a cure for vaccine. And Indian, one of the companies was a fourth player, and then again the remdesivir drugs which were produced there. So all the components, so these are benefits of the supply chain which we saw crisis, the humanity coming together to form that. The other aspect I feel to further it is the digital aspect. We were talking about, and you were mentioning about, I call it ABCD, it's, artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud, and data analytics. But if you look at the blockchain aspect, I think a lot of digital supply chain adoption in supply chain monitoring and risk mitigation is happening there. And that to some extent will help in the geopolitical, if God willing, God forbid something like that happens. As you mentioned, anything could happen. We are living in a VUCA world where anything can happen tomorrow morning. But I think suffice to say that in terms of healthcare, I think we would love to be the providers of that, and if there is peace in the world. And I didn't talk about another thing, ventilators. If you remember two things, oxygen concentrators during COVID and ventilators were too sought after. And oxygen concentrators, thanks to China, I know that because there were various social organizations like Rotary, Lions, a lot of impact organizations were importing it in huge quantities, and people were literally, begging for, air at that time. So that helped. So when you talk about ventilators, other medical, I'm not even touching medical equipments in the interest of time, but I can go on and on. But just to answer your question, Oscar, yes, we are playing a major role, and any supply disruption would obviously impact the global health.
It makes me wonder, to go off on a tangent, like no matter how good your logistics are in a globalized economy, if I suffered over a couple of years a serious infection that required very rare antibiotics, and it's a very common cause of death.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
vaccines, talk about vaccines.
I know firsthand that a small infection can kill you, and if you don't have access to antibiotics, it's going to be very problematic. So, what I'm reflecting on, is it wise from a global standpoint to have, like you say, up to 40% of APIs produced in India? I mean, it gives you a very disproportionate power. Wouldn't it make sense from a logistical supply chain point of view to spread out production in case there would be another medical emergency of some
That's a great point, Oscar. Yeah, and the thought leaders have to think on that aspects. There are a lot of de-risking factors. A lot of large pharmaceutical companies in India are also de-risking by having plants all over the world. So there are some plants coming up in South America and other places, so that then you are doing it at source, at on-premise in other countries in the world. So that's happening while we speak. And there is a lot of positioning. Again, India is doing in Russia, and lot of, from a pharmaceutical standpoint. Another aspect which I didn't mention about is CRO, the clinical research. There are tons of them in India. So you're right, we need to de-risk instead of, and another angle which the government is playing is trying to see how we can reduce our dependence on China for API by trying to see can we do homegrown those kind of ingredients, and there are incentives and benefits given to that. Yeah, you're right, we need to, de-risk that strategy, absolutely.
I want to move now to you, Veronica. You're based in Singapore, but you work with family offices and impact investing in Southeast Asia. And you've invested in drone technologies. Staying on the topic of de-risking and also maximizing efficiencies.
Thank you.
Can you share some of your thoughts on how new technologies can play a role in the supply chain?
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Frank, for the opportunity to speak alongside with the best speaker of Horasis. Right. So I'm from Singapore, and I manage mostly clients from the Southeast Asia. So when we talk about all the U.S. tension, the global North and global South tension at this point, that reminds me of one Chinese language, one phrase that we use a lot on crisis. I mean, it's like basically crisis in Chinese is called 危机. So it's actually made of the two words of danger and opportunities. So that is like such a right terms that we use, and especially when I come from the financial industry, any volatility is great opportunities for us. Without volatility, basically we can't trade. We can't really produce performance. So when all this, whether it's logistic or global supply chain disruptions happening, we tend to see a lot of solution provider, new and innovative kind of ideas all coming out. And us being in the wealth management industry, managing investment for the wealthy family, a lot of time we see people coming to us for fundraising, startup coming to us for really, especially on fundraising as well. And with that, we do see that, okay, I mean, having problem in the world may not be the worst thing because we can't avoid it. It's inevitable. So with problem comes solutions, and usually that's how unicorns emerge. So I do see a few actually recent startup that I've been seeing that really I would say it's very timely for the especially disruption like supply chain that we have here. One of them is like a cargo drone company, founded by a French guy, based himself in Malaysia, and I think he has office in France. So one of the amazing drone that he showed me, I mean on picture, supposed to visit Malaysia to look at the test flight, is the size of like a helicopter. So a net payload of 1 ton. So DHL Malaysia has been working with them, and I think the main test round that they have now is really flying the goods from the big ship to the port, which traditionally has been using like speedboat that is like not very efficient in terms of cost, in terms of it needs like
emissions.
Yeah, correct. So you need manpower to manage that as well. But for the drone, apparently they have a system that one person manage 4 drones. So that will be very helpful if you can do a longer range,
But I imagine
higher load.
charging, it's going to be run on batteries unless it's a fuel cell.
At the moment, I think they can't, especially the big one, they can't do on pure electric.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but they are looking at a cleaner energy for the fuel, to run such a drone. But the smaller drone, I mean, they do different sizes of drone. The smaller drone will be useful for medical healthcare aids, surveillance. So you are talking about not just logistics, you are talking about securities, you are talking about like maybe during crisis, during for example, earthquake or whatever, that you have certain aids that you need to deliver to the right people, but you can't do it on normal transportation. That is one. So another startup that I recently met, also through the drone company, and they work very closely with the drone company, is a AI-assisted logistics system company, where they have a system or building a system that can track the goods, basically a transportation of cargo from one point to another point. They can do a real-time tracking, plus with the AI data that they have, they can do prediction on the weather. And when really they can, basically when any goods face any disruption, they could even direct you to a better road. So I think these are interesting company, interesting people that we see, and they are in sort of like the idea could eventually develop into something that can assist the world. So I really truly believe in human being very adaptable, very creative, and you put yourself in a situation when you face problem, you will somehow find solutions. That I believe.
I think another just reflection, it's amazing in the last 10 years how you can ship a little piece of plastic from China that's worth 1 cent from Shine, and you can track it all the way to my home in Stockholm each second of the way, and then you have to pay $100 in import fees for it, but the shipping company has been paid nothing. It is an achievement of technology and mankind to do something like that, and it is, of course, very dependent on very cheap labor. But that seems like the least of the problems, the technology. Has it become that maybe logistics have become too good, that we're transporting things that really shouldn't be transported at all, and with such efficiency and speed?
Sorry, what was the question again?
Well, I'm saying, I guess from an environmental point of view, like I find it quite shocking that very low cost products that are produced from around the world gets transported to the other side of the world, like on a specific parcel basis, and it's a very efficient logistics supply chain, but it's too efficient to the degree that it's become too cheap, in that we are transporting products around the world that it doesn't really make sense that we should be transporting them.
I think it boils down to demand and supply, right? If you have the demand, a container is a container. Whether you feed half of it and ship out, or you fill it up and ship out, I think ultimately is really whether you have the demand for it. If really you have the demand for it, the cost can be reduced, then it makes sense. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I guess if anybody wants to comment, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there's too much trade going on, in the sense that we talk about reducing carbon footprint, like the supply chain, and so much of it is used up by what is discretionary consumption. It feels like I'm not getting any support on this question.
Yeah. You are right. That's a completely different angle. If we have an approach which is economic, whenever people are ready to pay, you ship, you make a profit. You could also have an approach by saying, what does make sense? And I give 2 examples. I was in the tobacco industry. A Marlboro cigarette, in average, has done 1.5 times round the world. Because as a business manager, I source it in a country where tobacco is cheap. I store it in a country where the storage is cheap and the local taxes and the cost of the working capital is low. I ship it to a place where the excise tax is the lowest, and I only look at my bottom line. And 1.5 times around the world, and I can tell you all the other large cigarettes, you have the same situation. Is it necessary? Answer, no. Is it what increases your profit the best? Answer, yes. Hence, question, what is your immediate EBIT and your quarterly result, or a broader consideration? I'm not answering, but it's a valid question. And you have a lot of examples where that question is like that. Now, if I was, a few days ago, I was in Baku. You have that big fight between the developed countries and the developing countries, how much the developed countries, who, yes, it's true, have polluted the world because the developing countries were not in a condition to do that. What should be the price paid by the North to the South? It's a political question. And in a fragmented world like today, in the lack of multilateralism, I expect that the COP29 will end up on very meager positive results. Should it be the case that we try to take measures to do something good for the planet? The answer is yes. Are we going to do it? The answer is no. And it's the gap between my short-term profit as a company, my America first, France first, Vietnam first, whatever, or a global approach, and the question is open.
I have an interesting anecdote I want to share. I was in Cuba a couple of weeks, 10 years ago, and was walking around the streets in Havana, and there was a long queue to a supermarket, and I was asking, like, what is it that they're queuing up for? Chicken from the United States. But how's that possible? It's embargoed. It's been shipped to Asia somewhere and then to Cuba, frozen chicken. And I found this so interesting that if there's one thing they should be able to do in Cuba is to farm their own chickens. But even then, capitalism is more efficient producing chicken in the US, shipping it, I think it was to Indonesia, and then back to Cuba, than just having their own
Do we need
farming.
strawberries for Christmas?
So if I may get another perspective, sorry, I'm going a little off tangent. So we were having a conversation with Simona in earlier panel, and I'm leading to healthcare with miniaturization, and bear with me, and how now I'm talking more from climate change perspective. So in the healthcare, there is huge disruption going on. So I don't know whether you all remember, during COVID time, there's an Israeli company which has bought a facial recognition pattern where instead of taking your blood pressure and your other parameters, you could just take a click of a camera at the image, and there was an app which could tell you your factors. So it reduced the option of buying devices. The moment, it's not necessarily great for the logistics industry, but I'm just trying to say from a digitization standpoint, that's happening. There are pulmonary PFT, what you call it, functionary test, which otherwise require devices. It can be done on the mobile phone. Okay? There are other blood tests happening, which can be done on the mobile phone. We talked about diabetic-related stuff. By the scan of an eye, of a retina, you can diagnose various diseases. Now, what's going to happen is certain parameters or certain equipment and medical equipments are going to be history because of miniaturization and AI-based lot of kind of algorithms changing the way. I just thought.
I like what you say, and coming from the logistics field, I remember I was in charge of a laboratory somewhere in Central Europe which were receiving blood tests from everywhere. And because it was important to transport the blood at controlled temperature, that it should be fast, for us, it was one of my most lucrative businesses. So I hope that people would do plenty of blood tests because my bottom line was improving. But if somebody through technology is doing what you just mentioned, then you suddenly have, it's a nightmare for the logistician because I'm losing my revenue,
Sure.
but it's very good for the planet. And actually, it's simply much more efficient for everybody in the society.
Yeah, I think so too. That's a very good point. Like a race to the bottom really doesn't benefit anyone. I mean, least of all China, producing products at cents on the dollar, and they're not getting or benefiting as a society, and all the pollution of producing it there, plus the pollution of transporting it all around the world for products that people don't really even want in the first place. It is, I think, quite an opportunity to. I mean, tariffs could possibly work in favor if it really raises the bar on products.
Now, if you give me 1 minute of advertising for the DP world, what they are doing is quite interesting. So we have been talking about those elements. Now, in the logistics business, you have two possibilities. You concentrate or you let a certain level of diversity. So far, the tendency has been concentrate, create integrators, buy, put together, create multinationals, create monsters, and then you have those monsters which are fighting with each other. What DP World is doing, and that's the reason actually of that conference here, is to say we are going to let all those small freight forwarders continue to live their life. So instead of I buy you, you shut up, and you do what I tell you, you continue to exist. But DP World is creating a platform. And by sharing the data, we are able to reach the same result than if you are a multinational. But instead of being a multinational of one country and one culture, it's actually an association of hundreds or thousands of actors, and the only common denominator is the technological platform. And everybody keeps their culture. So in a fragmented world, to answer the very first question which you asked, if you allow a Chinese to remain Chinese and to use whatever system they are for the last mile delivery in China, and somebody in Paraguay to remain a Paraguayan, and somebody in Africa to remain a Kenyan, on one side you disturb less the society, on the other side you're much closer to the last mile delivery possibility. You do not impose one central system, you just have people exchanging the data, and the key word is in a neutral way. And there were a very interesting discussion on the blockchain. I think the blockchain can again be an anonymous, apolitical tool. It's a medium, it's not an actor. So the summary of what I'm trying to say is you may have, I'm going to create the largest American group, I'm going to create the largest Chinese group, I'm going to create the largest Indian group, I'm going to create my thing. Or we say, I'm going to create a platform where everybody can remain who he is or she is, but we will give the same benefit, economies of scale, purchasing power, by sharing the data together in a very neutral way. And in that sense, the world trade can evolve without belonging to one group or another group.
Yes, and I think I want to. I think the elephant in the room here, with what you're saying, a joint global platform, it is what enables companies to always seek out the cheapest labor. People talk about automated labor and efficiencies, but most of what we buy is produced in very bad conditions in third world countries. And by creating a platform that goes like, well, it's very easy to get it transported from wherever you can find the worst paid worker. This is getting very political, but I really do believe in raising the quality standards of living of all people all over the world. That is a measure of success. It's not the total wealth; it's the highest median or average wealth. And I want to talk to you, Roger. You shared a book with me about your mother, and it was very touching to see your brother being in the People Liberation Army and all that you've seen with your family coming to the US. And how do you see this? I want to end on a note of optimism about lifting the world global economy with shipping.
Well, you mentioned the book itself. I recently, together with my siblings, wrote a book. Well, we had somebody help us write a book on my mother. And in our family, the mother we believe, is more important than the father itself. And a lot of families have books on their grandfathers and fathers and so forth. But anyway, I honestly believe that if we want to really move forward, the key is to accept each other's lifestyle. Don't impose your system onto others. Now, you talk about logistics and everything else. I happen to be from a large container shipping company family, a company called OOCL, Orient Overseas Container Line. Actually, we sold the business several years back, and we looked back, and one of the reasons we sold it is the industry was changing rapidly, and either you become very, very large or you become small where you have mobility. We're right in the middle, okay? And so we had a choice of either acquiring other people or to be sold or merge. Mm-hmm. And the idea of merging, where you have different cultures around the world, we just didn't think it would work. So when we had the offer, and we're a listed company itself, it was almost 30% above the market cap, and we own 70% of the company. We were very, very happy. So I think if we move forward, whether it's the logistics or anything else, key is acceptance of other people's culture and move on. And that's the thing. Don't impose your culture onto others. Why impose it? If they want to copy you, that's fine. You can help them. But to impose it onto others, that's, in my opinion, not the right thing to do.
We still have a little bit of time. Murat, can you give us a final statement?
Again, I will go back to the Greater Caspian region, and I have several comments. First comment about the Belt and Road Initiative, which was, by the way, initially announced in Kazakhstan in 2013 by Chinese President Xi Jinping. And this initiative, we were thinking, okay, that's a great idea to re-involve ancient Silk Road to the world logistics. It went well till 2019. In 2019, there was a memorandum of understanding for strategic cooperation between Switzerland and China was signed in Beijing to develop Belt and Road markets. Unfortunately, then COVID started. For 3 years, China was in lockdown. It was very difficult to move things. Then there was a new 5-year plan, which was announced that domestic circulation is the priority instead of the overseas projects. But now, since the last year, we see again good developments for Belt and Road Initiative, which could bring a lot of good things to our region. This is one statement. The other one is how to develop Greater Caspian region logistic connectivity. And here is very important that we don't say global, we say the regional approach or corridor mentality. Why so? Because if there is a corridor and our region is landlocked. In some countries of our region, Uzbekistan is double landlocked, together with Liechtenstein. Michael, the Liechtenstein prince was here yesterday on the main stage, was saying about this. But Liechtenstein is a very small country, and which is economically is a part of Switzerland. Uzbekistan is almost 40 million people today, and they are only one country in the world, a big country, which is double landlocked. And how to deal with this? To move cargoes from Uzbekistan to the world market, you need to cross 5, 6, 7, 8 borders and customs and so on. And we are talking about the logistics corridors. And the logistics corridors, it means that it's a chain. If one part of segment of the chain is broken and has no enough capacity, the whole corridor is blocked. And that's why we should, the governments of the country, the businesses also, we should move from the country mentality and local mentality to the corridor and regional mentality. We should do this together in parallel, develop all segments of the corridors. And I think for now it's okay. We can continue later on.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.